Hi, everyone. My name's Carmen Cole. I am the social media editor for Portal, Libraries in the Academy. I'm very pleased to welcome my colleague, John Meier, this morning to talk to us about his article in the newest issue of Portal. John is the head of STEM for engagement and outreach at the Penn State University Libraries University Park location. John will be speaking about his article entitled Changing Leadership, a longitudinal study of decision-making by academic library leaders. So this article can be found on Portal's preprint site in volume 24, issue 4. And this article is very free to read, and viewers may access the article by navigating to the Johns Hopkins Press preprint site for Portal. So thanks for joining us today, John. In this article, you have replicated a study that you conducted in 2016 for Portal. What inspired you to turn back to this research topic? And could you please tell us a little bit about the findings from the first article?
Sure, Carmen. There are a couple of factors that led me back to my previous study. The first was a lack of longitudinal studies in the library literature. So a few years earlier, I had repeated a Google Scholar study with some amazing new co-authors. You were one of them, which showed a pretty dramatic change over a 10-year period with information resources. And so in general, I'm drawn to longitudinal empirical studies where you can really see change and measure it. And so with this leadership study, I'd looked back at a previous sabbatical leave I had had, and I had an opportunity for another sabbatical. And I thought, well, one of the benefits of being a tenure track librarian at Penn State is that we can apply for and be granted this amount of time. And I knew from the previous study, which you mentioned, that it needed that much time to do this kind of research, the interviews, the transcribing, the coding, and writing of the outcomes. So all those came together with that. And some of the things I asked about in the previous study were what changes did senior library leaders expect over the next 3 to 5 years? And I was curious, okay, how many of those came to fruition
Yeah.
based on their expectations? So you also asked me kind of like what are some of the findings of the previous article? Well, for instance, some of them I talked to, many of them mentioned the highest change they expected was new roles for librarians and staff. Like
Mhm.
how would that they expected the jobs and even the people doing those jobs to change. Like there would be more specialists with PhDs, and that was a theme 10 years ago or 8 to 10 years ago. They
Right.
also noted that budget cuts and retirements drove a lot of the change in their libraries. They said strategic planning was the reason they made the change or how they mapped out the change. But what drove the ability to make those changes, or when would they make the changes? And it was budget cuts and retirements. So, all those were percolating around in my head as, things that I found in the previous study that, you know, did those bear out? There was also some important findings concerning demographic challenges for
Mhm.
academic library leadership. The population I studied was sort of an aging or graying of the profession cohort of senior deans and university librarians, and they were intentionally looking to develop a next generation of library leaders, more diverse through professional development programs such as ARL, Association of Research Libraries, and a couple other mentoring and ways of, sort of finding who would be the next generation of library leaders. And so those are some of the findings of my first article.
Okay. So to kind of follow up on that, could you give a summary of your article published in this latest issue of Portal and how the findings from this study compared or contrasted to your previous study?
So in this study, I interviewed 37 senior library leaders at AAU, that's American Association of University Institutions. So these are like the largest academic research libraries in North America. Some of them, most of them are ARL, Association of Research Libraries Institutions, but not all of them. So it's the identical population to the previous study, and I asked them the same questions. So I really wanted to see the difference there. Though, due to a more rapid turnover in those roles, so one change was the people in the previous study had been there 12 years, and most of at their current institution 12 years, and in the new study it was 8 years. So they were there less time. I
Right.
almost interviewed a completely new group of participants. There were a few folks who were in both studies, but based on random like who responded, there were 44 in the previous study, 37 in the new study. The AAU had increased by a few institutions, and it continues to increase. So it was interesting to see almost completely different individuals, but at the same institutions, how they would maybe make decisions differently. So how I went about conducting the study, I interviewed over Zoom this time because has become a ubiquitous technology. It also allowed me to use automatic transcription to capture the text of those interviews and record the audio, which was a lot easier. My previous study, I had to hire a transcriptionist and had to work that way.
Yeah.
I again cleaned and coded the transcripts using the same code book as 2016, though due to some new themes emerging, it had to be expanded to accommodate some of those.
Yeah.
So some of the findings that changed, I'd say in the prior study, really it was a lot about the senior management team, and that was like who deans and university librarians would go to for their decision making. And now that group is still important, but they talked much more in the new study about middle managers. So it's
Mm,
that other layer that could be like a department heads group. It's
yeah.
called different things at different institutions, but that group rose in prominence in the amount of times it was mentioned. They also
Mhm.
talked a lot more about like generally reaching out to all employees, whether that's through town halls or other types of forums where these senior library leaders, sometimes in hundreds of employees, actually are trying to reach out to the individual and trying to get that interaction or feedback, however possible, from the greater body of their institutions, their libraries. Another finding, which was a bit different, was while budget cuts and retirement still were the opportunities to make change, the COVID-19 pandemic had just happened. And so the scale of these challenges was truly unprecedented. One library talked about losing a third of its employees
Wow.
during this time, right? So, this disruption the deans and university librarians, these senior leaders, handled in different ways. Some of them used this opportunity to make changes that were a long time coming. Some of them were about salary equity. Some were about shifting departments and units around. And others really shied away from change because there was so much happening with the Black Lives Matter movement, with COVID, that had already disrupted their employees. And so they were very cognizant of not wanting to add more disruptions at work. And some of them, I think most of them don't even use the word reorganization anymore. They use the term realignment, which has
Mm,
really started to be the way that change to be more natural or gradual, at least in the way it's rolled out.
okay.
And to close, I'd have to say that the demographics of the study population did become more diverse and younger, which
Mhm.
was kind of what the previous study's intent of those senior library leaders was to do. Obviously, well, I did uncover quite a few gaps, particularly Latinx, Hispanic individuals looking to be in these senior leadership roles. But I discussed the details of that more in another paper, which is
Okay.
forthcoming in college and research libraries in 2025.
Great. That's great to hear too that we're going to hear more about this article. I think this is super interesting. And who knows, maybe you're going to do this again in another 10 years or so, just to kind of keep showing us this change that is happening. I think we all probably had the inkling that this change was happening, and you've certainly proved it. So, what is the biggest takeaway that you have for your article for Portal readers?
As you sort of mentioned, there were a lot of things that were obvious about the COVID-19 pandemic's impact. It was huge. All libraries had retirements, layoffs. There were budget cuts that are continuing to this day based
Yeah.
on a lot of these disruptions. More change than I anticipated based on the previous study, which those leaders had talked about making changes, but in a sense, it was a little more gradual. And I think that COVID-19 really accelerated that pace.
Mhm.
Also, the rapid turnover at the senior leadership levels, I believe, will continue to accelerate. So
Mhm.
it's something where we see folks moving from associate university librarians to university librarians at a different institution. And there's ways that you can track that. And I hope to continue this research, as you indicated, to kind of see, well, what is the impact of that on the institutions? It can bring more change, but it can also cause a change overload or a kind of a burnout from change. And so the one thing I hope that readers take away from this study is that there is an intention to a lot of these changes that's expressed, and it lends itself to things that are important. Open was a big, really increased in importance in this new study, and it's something where it's a more equitable access to scholarship, and it's front of the minds, the top priority for academic library leaders, as well as diversity, equity, inclusion, which jumped up as a priority for these senior leaders, and they can affect some of the biggest changes because, of the ways they set policy, make hiring decisions. They've really tried to diversify their senior leadership teams. And I really hope that through my articles, I'm able to show that the change is happening, but it needs more work. And that
Mhm.
there's a lot of these programs for professional development, as well as the support of current leaders that will build future library leaders and future library employees that feel empowered and are empowered by new leadership strategies that can really make change in academic libraries for the better.
Thanks so much for speaking to us about this great article. Again, viewers may read the article for free via the Johns Hopkins University Press preprint site for Portal. Thank you for watching with us today, and keep an eye out for our next author interview. Thanks, everyone.